In the heart of a Wyoming winter, Ranger Christian Ward saw fire blooming through the pines, a cabin swallowed by orange light against the snow. He fought the blaze with bare hands and desperate breath, but by dawn only silence remained. 3 days later, searching the ruins, Christian found 5 tiny footprints leading into the forest. He followed them to a hollow beneath a fallen tree where 5 children waited, quiet, unblinking, untouched by fear. They spoke little, ate nothing, and at night whispered to someone unseen. When Christian returned to the ashes, he found something impossible: footprints leading back into the fire. That's when he began to understand that the cabin hadn't burned down by accident. It had burned before. What did those children bring out of the fire that night? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The snow had eased by morning, leaving behind a fragile stillness. Christian sat by the cabin window, coffee steaming in his hands, eyes drawn to the children outside. They huddled near the fence, tracing shapes in the frost with small, careful fingers. They never laughed, never fought, never ran the way children should. Their silence pressed heavier than the winter itself. He'd spent 20 years in these mountains and thought he'd seen everything the wild could do. Blizzards that snapped trees in half, wolves that vanished like smoke. But nothing like this. Nothing that looked back at him with eyes that seemed to remember too much. Clara, the smallest, watched him most. She had a steadiness that unsettled him, as if she saw through every word he didn't say. That afternoon, he prepared stew and set 5 bowls on the table. The children just stared. No one moved. Finally, Clara whispered, "Mama said we shouldn't eat until the fire rests." Christian set the spoon down, pulse slowing. "What fire?" he asked softly. "The one that follows," she replied, as though it were the simplest truth in the world. Later, when the light began to fade, he tucked them into spare cots by the hearth. Their small breaths made no fog in the cold air. He sat by the stove long after they slept, staring at the flames, feeling something pull him back toward the ruins. He thought about his wife, Miriam, her laughter on warm autumn mornings, the way she'd hold a cup of tea between both hands just to feel its warmth. The wildfire that took her had moved faster than any warning. He remembered trying to reach her through the smoke, the world turning orange and cruel. Since then, he'd taken every call, every storm, as a way to make up for the one he couldn't stop. He stood and went to his cot, pulling the wool blanket aside. The floorboard underneath was slightly raised. When he pried it loose, his fingers brushed something solid, leather, old and dry. He lifted out the book, its spine cracked, its cover carved with a ranger's crest, long out of use. The first page was dated January 1889. The handwriting made him stop breathing. Patrol along Hollow Creek, snow heavy. Found signs of fire again. 5 children unaccounted for. He turned the page. They wander near the old cabin, whispering the same name. I tried to send them away, but they always come back. When I burn the wood, they rebuild it in my dreams. The next entry was stranger still. I've begun to forget the days. The forest won't let me leave. My hands write things I don't recall. The children call me Christian. I don't remember telling them my name. He closed the book slowly, the fire crackling behind him. Outside, the snow had started again, fine, thin flakes falling without sound. The wind carried faint singing, the same tune the children had hummed that morning. He looked back at them. Even asleep, they faced the same direction. Toward the window, toward the dark, beyond the tree line. Christian placed the logbook on the table and opened his field lantern. Inside, the flame flickered once and burned blue before settling. He frowned, rubbed his eyes, and when he looked again, the fire was steady from outside. Clara's voice floated faintly through the cracks. "He wrote it before you came back." Christian turned to the door, hand tightening on the latch. "Before I came back?" he whispered, but the only answer was the wind slipping through the chimney, carrying that same lullaby from a century ago, a tune older than memory itself. The next morning, he'd ride into town to find out who had owned that cabin, who those children might have been. Yet deep down, part of him already knew. Some questions didn't wait for answers. Some just circled back, the way smoke always found its way to the same sky. He looked at the logbook again and whispered, "What did you do, old man?" And from the hearth, the fire crackled back, a sound too close to a voice to be wind. The third morning came heavy with mist, the kind that swallowed the horizon whole. Christian saddled his horse at first light, intending to ride out toward Hollow Creek again. The children were still asleep when he left, or so he thought. But halfway down the trail, he heard footsteps crunching behind him. Clara stood there, coat buttoned wrong, boots untied, her breath not misting in the cold. She held something cupped between her small hands. "You dropped this," she said softly. Christian frowned. "Dropped what?" She opened her palms. The toy horse, blackened, fragile, edges crumbling like charcoal. The same one he'd seen buried in the ashes of the burned cabin. He hadn't taken it. He remembered leaving it where it lay. "How did you—" "It followed you," she said. "It doesn't like being alone." Christian felt the hair rise on his arms. He took it carefully, the wood faintly warm, as though it had been sitting near a flame. "Where did it come from, Clara?" he asked. She stared past him toward the forest. "It's his, the one who watches." He wanted to press her, but something in her expression, old, distant, resigned, stopped him. He pocketed the toy and rode on, leaving her at the trail's edge. The ruins looked different in the morning fog, smaller somehow, as if sinking into the snow. He dismounted and crouched near the remains of the hearth. Beneath the ash, he saw faint markings, circles, overlapping symbols carved into the stones long before the fire. He traced them with his gloved hand, feeling the grooves beneath the soot. There were 5 of them. That evening, when Christian returned, the children were gathered around the hearth again, whispering among themselves. The toy horse sat on the mantel, though he had left it inside his coat pocket. He didn't move it, didn't even mention it. Instead, he reached for the old ranger's logbook and turned to the next entry. The handwriting seemed sharper, almost etched instead of written. The toys keep turning up near the bedposts. I burn them every night. By dawn, they return unburned. They whisper when the fire grows low. A soft creak came from behind him. He turned. The children were standing in the doorway, 5 shadows in the flickering light. Clara stepped forward and pointed at the logbook. "You read it wrong," she said. He swallowed. "What do you mean?" "It says he burned them because they wouldn't sleep," she replied calmly. "But we were only waiting for him to stop the fire." "Who was he?" "The first one." Christian set the book down. His voice was steady but thin. "The first what, Clara?" She smiled, not cruelly, but with a kind of weary patience. "The first Christian Ward." A silence followed, so still the air itself seemed to listen. Then the logs in the fire pit cracked sharply, and sparks leapt toward the ceiling like startled birds. That night, Christian dreamed again. He was in the same cabin, only older, the walls unfamiliar yet known to his bones. Children's laughter echoed in the next room. The toy horse sat on the table unburned. He reached for it, and when he turned it over, his own initials glowed faintly beneath the belly. He woke with his hand already clenched around it. The warmth was stronger now, pulsing like a heartbeat. Outside, a wolf howled, long, mournful, almost human. He rose quietly, stepping past the sleeping children, and set the toy horse back on the mantel. The fire dimmed as he did, the flames curling inward, shrinking as though drawing breath. For the first time in years, Christian felt truly afraid. Not of what he could see, but of what the forest might remember. He went to the window. The fog was gone. The clearing glowed faintly, though there was no moon. Footprints circled the cabin, small, overlapping, and fresh. He whispered, "Who's out there?" A child's voice, soft and close, answered from behind him, "He's coming soon." He turned, but the cots were empty. Only the toy horse remained, sitting in front of the fire, staring at him through hollowed eyes, its charred frame rocking gently back and forth as though soothed by invisible hands. The snow returned that night with a vengeance, swirling thick against the cabin windows. Christian sat awake at the table, oil lamp sputtering, the logbook open beside him. He'd gone through every page and found something new each time. entries that hadn't been there the night before. The words changed, or perhaps his memory did. Either way, the story deepened like a wound. The last line he'd read still clung to him. The key must never be turned again. He didn't understand it until morning, when he stripped the children's bedding to wash and felt something hard beneath the blanket, wrapped tight like a secret waiting to breathe. When he opened it, there it was, a key of blackened iron, slick with frost, though the fire burned beside him. The children froze as he held it up, their faces emptied of expression. Clara whispered, "That's hers. Whose?" Christian asked. Clara didn't answer. She only pressed her hands together as though in prayer and stared at the flames. Later, when the children napped, he stepped outside. The forest was quiet, except for the wind slipping through the aspens. He knelt near the fence post, held the key up to the grey light, and saw the faint etching of 5 rings near its top. They matched the design from the burned hearth he'd uncovered earlier. He pocketed the key and saddled his horse. Something told him this wasn't just a keepsake. The ride to town was long and colourless. At the county archives, he met Agnes Miller, the sheriff's sister and caretaker of old records. Her eyes widened when she saw the key. "That's a burial lock," she murmured. "You'd find those on old orphan homes, the kind they sealed shut after a fire." "After?" Christian repeated. Some believed doors should be locked to keep spirits from wandering. Not to trap the living, but to contain what came after. Christian leaned forward. "Was there one near Hollow Creek?" She hesitated, then pulled a brittle map from a drawer. "There was," she said, tapping the paper. "Burned down winter of 1889. No survivors." He told her about the 5 children, about the fire that wasn't right. Her face drained of color. "5?" she whispered. "There were 5 then, too." He left before dusk, wind cutting through his coat like knives. By the time he reached the outpost, the sky had darkened to ash. The children were standing by the doorway, waiting, as though they'd known when he'd return. "Where did you go?" Clara asked. "To find out who you are," he said, her eyes flicked toward his pocket. "And did you?" He pulled out the key. "You tell me." The children stepped back in unison, their faces pale as driftwood. The youngest boy whispered, "It only opens once." Christian felt his breath falter. "Opens what?" They didn't answer. Instead, Clara reached toward the fireplace and pointed at the stones. Beneath the soot, faint lines gleamed, the same rings, 5 of them waiting like a forgotten command. He crouched near the hearth, pressing the key against the groove. It fit perfectly. For a long moment he hesitated. Every part of him said not to turn it. But something older, something beyond reason, urged his hand forward. The metal clicked. A hollow sound rose from beneath the floor, like a sigh exhaled through centuries. The fire flickered blue, then steadied. Clara whispered, "Now she knows you remember." Christian stood slowly. "Who?" Clara's voice was small but certain. "The mother of the fire." Outside, the snow had stopped. The world was too still. He looked back down at the hearth where the key still rested. It had left no mark, but the air carried the faint scent of smoke, not from the wood, from something older, buried deep below. He doused the lamp and sat by the window until morning. The forest didn't move. The stars seemed wrong, and somewhere deep beneath the floorboards, something began to tap, steady, patient, rhythmic, as though knocking for permission to come in. Morning came grey and empty. The snow had crusted into a hard shell overnight, muffling every step outside the cabin. Christian moved like a man in a dream, every breath a cloud that barely seemed his own. The iron key still lay on the table where he'd left it, black as a shadow burned into the wood. The children were quiet. They ate without a word. Clara's gaze never left the fireplace. When the others went outside to fetch water, Christian crouched before the hearth again. The ashes had cooled to powder, but something glinted beneath them, a faint shimmer, like a coin catching light. He reached in and pulled out a small brass locket, its surface scorched and warped, but its clasp still intact. He opened it with his knife. Inside were 2 photographs, one of a veiled woman, her face half-turned as if she had refused to be seen, and one of Clara, unmistakably her. But the style of her dress, the stiff lace collar and sepia tone, spoke of a time at least 50 years past. The locket dropped from his hand and clattered on the stone floor. He waited until nightfall before showing it to Clara. She sat apart from the others, sewing one of the younger girl's sleeves by the lamplight. "Clara," he said softly, setting the locket before her. Her needle froze mid-air. "Where did you find it?" she asked, though her tone made it sound more like an accusation. "In the hearth. After I turned the key." She stared at it for a long time, then closed her eyes. "She's close now," she whispered. "You woke her. Who is she?" Clara didn't answer right away. Her lips moved, but the words came too soft to catch. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a tremor. She wasn't always angry. She wanted children, but the world took them first. The fire was her way of keeping them safe. Christian felt his stomach turn. "You mean she started it?" Clara only nodded. "And you?" "She kept us," Clara said, and for the first time he saw something ancient flicker behind her eyes, a grief too large for a child to bear. That night, Christian couldn't sleep. The cabin walls seemed to hum with something alive, a low vibration that resonated in his bones. Around midnight, a gust of wind pressed against the window, and the fire snapped as if struck by unseen hands. The smell of smoke thickened. He rose, coughing, and turned toward the chimney, but what he saw wasn't fire. It was movement. The smoke twisted upward into a figure's shape, tall, veiled and still. He stumbled back, eyes watering, and heard the faint, metallic click of the locket snapping shut by itself. The children appeared in the doorway, every one of them wide-eyed and trembling. "She's looking for you," Clara said. "Why me?" "Because you turned the key. You found what she left behind." Christian backed toward the table, heart pounding. "What does she want?" Clara's answer came so soft he barely heard it. "To finish what she started." The figure in the smoke tilted its head. For a moment it looked almost human, until the veil slipped enough for him to see her mouth, sewn shut with black thread. Christian reached for the key, but it was gone. The children screamed. The fire roared again, brighter, hotter, but the smoke did not rise. It poured outward, seeping along the floor like dark water. He grabbed the nearest blanket and smothered the flames, choking, coughing, until suddenly the fire went out as if snuffed by an unseen hand. Silence followed. No wind, no breath. The locket lay open on the floor, its photographs turned black. The children stood motionless. Clara looked at him, eyes wide with a strange kind of pity. "You can't hide her anymore," she said. "You're part of her story now." Christian wanted to demand answers, but his voice wouldn't come. Something in the air had changed, a scent like wet soil after rain, old and heavy. He turned toward the door, meaning to run. But when he opened it, the forest outside wasn't the forest anymore. The trees stood like charred bones against a red sky. The snow was ash. The air burned his throat. He turned back, but the cabin was gone. Only the locket remained in his hand. Warm as a heartbeat, he heard her then, not in his ears, but inside his head. A woman's whisper, tender and terrible all at once. "Welcome home, Christian." When Christian woke, the locket was gone. He lay in a shallow depression of soot and snow where the cabin had once stood. The air was still, and the world had gone colorless. Gray trees, gray sky, gray light. His body ached with cold. For a long while he didn't move at all. Then from the tree line came a sound like a breath drawn through teeth. He turned toward it and saw Clara standing between the trunks, her dress torn, her bare feet sunk deep into the snow. The others stood behind her, unmoving, as though waiting for something. "Clara," he called, voice raw. "Where are we?" She tilted her head. "Home." Christian tried to stand, but stumbled forward, his knees sinking into the icy ash. The trees around him no longer looked real. Each trunk shimmered faintly, like reflections on dark glass. He followed them through the dead forest until they reached a small rise overlooking a frozen pond. At its center, half buried in snow and frost, stood a single tall mirror framed in blackened wood. It leaned against a stump as though someone had placed it there deliberately. "What is this?" Christian asked. Clara approached the mirror slowly. Her breath fogged the glass, and for an instant her reflection appeared, but the image that looked back wasn't hers. It was older, worn, hollow-eyed. The same veiled woman from the locket. The frost spread outward in jagged lines, webbing across the glass, until the woman's face vanished again. Christian felt the pull of it, like standing on the edge of deep water. Clara don't, but she pressed her palm to the frost. The glass shuddered, rippled like liquid. A voice came through, low and distant. "You shouldn't have brought him here." Christian staggered back. "Who are you?" The voice seemed to echo inside his chest. "I was the keeper. I watched the fires. I waited for the lost ones. The orphans." "Yes, and now, one more?" Clara lowered her head. "She means you." Christian's pulse pounded in his ears. "I'm not staying here." The mirror pulsed again, this time brighter, the frost glowing from within. Beneath the surface of the glass, shapes moved, children, faces pale and indistinct. They're pressing against the inside, as though trapped under ice. One of them looked exactly like Clara. Christian's breath caught. He turned toward her, the real Clara, but she was gone. "Clara!" he shouted, spinning in circles, scanning the trees.
"Clara!"
The figures in the mirror began to move faster, their hands smearing trails through the frost. Whispers rose, overlapping, pleading. He backed away, but his reflection didn't follow. The reflection stood still, eyes black as coal, lips curling into a faint, knowing smile. Christian's chest tightened. The mirror trembled, and with a sound like cracking ice, a hand shot through, grey, stiff, cold as death. It seized his wrist. He shouted, tried to wrench free, but the grip tightened, pulling. The frost spread up his arm like a living thing, biting deep beneath the skin. He drove his knife into the mirror's frame, once, twice, until the wood splintered and the hand released him. The mirror's glow died instantly, its surface turning opaque. He fell to his knees, gasping. His arm was pale, almost translucent in places, veins turning faintly blue beneath the skin. When he looked back toward the trees, the children were gone. Only the sound of faint laughter lingered, echoing through the woods like a memory refusing to die. Christian stumbled toward the frozen pond. He had to find shelter, had to find warmth. But when he reached the far edge, he saw footprints leading away, 5 sets, small and bare, vanishing into the mist. He followed. The trail wound through the woods, deeper into silence, until the trees opened onto another clearing. There, half collapsed, stood what remained of the old ranger outpost. His outpost, though it shouldn't have been standing at all. The structure was blackened but whole, as if rebuilt by unseen hands. Smoke drifted lazily from its crooked chimney. He stepped inside. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. The table, the lantern, even his jacket on the chair. Only one thing was different. Against the far wall stood the mirror, unbroken, clean, reflecting him perfectly. The moment his gaze met its surface, the frost reappeared, first in corners, then across his entire reflection. His breath fogged the glass, and the image inside smiled again. Then it whispered, and not with one voice, but 5, layered and soft as falling ash. "You can't leave until you remember." Christian's pulse thundered. "Remember what?" The mirror flashed once, and for a heartbeat. He saw the fire again, the cabin burning, the children screaming, his own hands holding the lantern that had started it all. He stumbled backward, heart hammering. "No, that's not—" The frost climbed higher, sealing the mirror in solid ice. In its frozen surface, his reflection still moved, and it was smiling. By morning, the frost on the mirror had spread across the floorboards like spilled mercury. Christian didn't dare touch it. He only watched as the grey veins crept toward his boots, whispering softly in the quiet. He fled the cabin. The forest met him with a hush that felt almost deliberate. Every tree leaned inward, heavy with snow that refused to fall. The world seemed to hold its breath. Half a mile down the ridge, he tripped over something half buried in soot and ice. A lantern, cracked and black, its glass warped. The metal frame was etched with small symbols, spirals and eyes, none he recognized. He lifted it. The moment he did, a dull red ember stirred inside, flickering weakly like a heart beginning to beat again. He froze. It hadn't been lit, no fuel, no heat, yet the glow deepened, reflecting faintly across his face. The air thickened around him. A voice, no louder than a sigh, rose from within the lantern. "You were supposed to leave us," it said. He dropped it in shock, but the voice didn't fade. "You promised you'd go when the fire stopped. You said you'd bury the truth." The ember brightened. Shadows rippled outward in slow waves, each one shaping itself into forms. Children running through snow, a woman crying by the window, a man standing at the threshold with a lantern in his hand. Himself. Christian stumbled back, shaking his head. "No, that's not how it happened." The ember pulsed redder, hotter, angrier. The voice deepened, distorting. "Lies feed the flame." He clenched his fists. "I tried to save you." The lantern's light dimmed to a sickly orange, and the images shifted. The cabin again, but smaller, older. The children hiding under the floorboards. The woman nailing the boards shut, whispering prayers as she struck the first match. Smoke. Screams. Then, Christian again, standing outside, holding his own lantern, watching the blaze consume the house. He gasped and dropped to his knees. "No, that wasn't me. I wasn't there." The ember flickered violently. "Lies feed the flame." His breath steamed in the cold air. "I wasn't there," he repeated, though the words no longer sounded convincing even to himself. The lantern glowed brighter, searing through the snow. The symbols etched into its metal began to hum. He could feel something pressing against his chest, memory or guilt or both. He picked it up again. "If I tell the truth," he whispered, "will it stop?" The flame steadied. "I was sent to investigate the fire," he said slowly. "The cabin had already burned. I thought I could help." The light dimmed, but when I saw the woman, when she came through the smoke, I ran. I thought she was... The ember pulsed once, faintly, encouraging. I thought she was dead already. The lantern's glow flickered, softening to pale gold. For the first time, warmth touched his fingers. Then he heard footsteps behind him. He turned. The children stood there, 5 silhouettes in the falling snow. None of them spoke. None blinked. Clara stepped forward. "You remember now?" "I'm trying to," he said. "You don't have to try," she whispered. "You just have to stop pretending you're still alive." The words hit him like a blow. "What are you talking about?" "The night of the fire," she said. "You didn't run. You tried to save us. You carried the lantern inside. You never made it out." He shook his head, backing away. "That's not true." The lantern's light shifted again, crimson bleeding into gold. His reflection in the glass stared back, charred, eyes hollow, smoke rising from blackened skin. The forest blurred. The ground trembled underfoot. "You said you'd bury the truth," Clara murmured, her voice now two-toned, hers and another's, the woman's from the mirror. "But you buried yourself instead." The ember inside the lantern flared white-hot, and the world dissolved in heat. Christian screamed, then realized the fire wasn't burning him. It was inside him, memory reshaping itself like molten metal, cooling into form. He saw it all, the storm, the fire, the desperate rescue. The way the roof fell in before he could reach the children. The way his own lantern spilled fuel across the floor. The way the world went red, then black. When the vision faded, he was kneeling in snow that had turned to ash. The children were gone. The lantern sat beside him, cold and dark. He whispered into the wind, voice breaking, "What am I now?" From somewhere deep within the trees, Clara's voice answered faintly, "A keeper, like her, until the next fire finds its truth." Christian bowed his head. The lantern's wick glowed once more, a tiny, steady ember, and when he looked up, the forest was gone. Only smoke and silence remained. The logbook was never meant to be found. Christian discovered it by accident while clearing what remained of the foundation. The air still smelled faintly of soot, though weeks had passed. When his shovel struck the charred leather, he almost mistook it for bark. He knelt, brushing away ash, until the embossed initials appeared. E.W. He hesitated. Elias Ward, the ranger who had come before him. He sat against the stump of an old pine and opened the cover. The first pages were brittle, each date from 1889. The handwriting was precise, steady, the kind of script taught to men who kept order on wild frontiers. The early entries spoke of ordinary things: weather, tracks seen near the river, notes about wolves, and supplies sent from the outpost. Then gradually, the tone changed. October 17th, 1889, a family built a cabin north of the ridge. 5 children. I met the mother once, a quiet woman. Something in her eyes unsettled me. I cannot tell if she's afraid of something or if she's something to be feared. Christian turned the page carefully. The ink had bled from damp October 23rd, smoke sighted from the clearing. The cabin burned before I could reach it. I found no bodies, only small footprints leading into the trees. He stopped reading for a moment, the hairs along his arms prickling. His own recollection, the footprints, the children, mirrored these words too precisely. He read on. October 24th. I followed them for miles. They never slowed, though the youngest could not have been more than 4. I heard them whispering in the wind, calling for their mother. Then silence. I found them beneath a fallen tree. They were not alive, yet they breathed. I carried them back to the outpost. The handwriting changed there, tilted, lighter, as though written by a trembling hand. October 26. They do not eat. They do not sleep. The smallest one speaks for the rest. She calls me by name, though I never told her. She says, "Mama says thank you for bringing us home. I hear the woman at night." She stands by the window. I'm beginning to forget which of us burned. Christian felt his chest tighten. The words bled into one another as though written with shaking hands. He turned to the next page, blank except for a single sentence written in a darker ink, fresher somehow despite the years. If you read this, you have taken my place. He slammed the book shut. The forest around him seemed to lean closer, the whisper of the trees threading into a chorus. He rose, gripping the logbook tight. "Elias," he said aloud, voice raw, "what did you do?" The wind answered, soft at first, then shaping itself into words. "I kept the fire." Christian staggered back. "No, you carry it now," the voice continued, deep as the ground beneath him. "You wrote the last page." He looked down. The logbook had changed in his hands. The old ink faded. New words etched themselves slowly into the final blank page, written in his own handwriting. October 12th, 2025. Found the logbook today. The children are gone again, but not far. I can still hear them. I think they're waiting for me to light the lantern. His hands shook violently. I didn't write that. The book pulsed, warm, almost alive. A single ember fell from its spine, landing in the snow. It didn't die. It sank, hissing into the ground, until a faint red light glowed beneath the surface. He dropped the logbook and stepped back. The snow melted in a widening circle, steam rising like breath from the earth. When the glow subsided, 5 small shapes stood where the ember had fallen. The children. Their faces were pale, eyes reflecting the faint firelight. Clara stepped forward, the logbook now cradled in her arms. "You finished it," she said softly. "It's time to go home." He took a step toward her. "Where is home, Clara?" She smiled faintly as if she pitied him. "Where the story started. Where you burned with us." The wind turned warm. Ash fell like snowflakes. The forest blurred into smoke and shadow. The logbook opened on its own, pages fluttering to the very last line, the one he swore he hadn't written. New ink spread across the bottom in his own hand. "I see her now by the fire." Christian turned. And there she was, the veiled woman, the mother, the keeper of the flame. She raised a blackened hand toward him, not in threat but in welcome. The children reached for her too. One by one they vanished into her outline, dissolving into cinders that drifted upward like sparks. Clara lingered last. "Thank you for finding us." He wanted to speak, but his throat burned. The fire inside him stirred once more. Then she was gone, and he was alone again, holding the logbook that no longer felt heavy, only warm. He looked down. On the final page, one new line glowed faintly in red ink. Keeper confirmed. He closed the book. And somewhere deep within the pines, a faint light began to burn. The sky that morning had a copper tint, the kind that turns frost into glitter and shadows into bruises. Christian woke to the faint crackle of paper, a sound he hadn't heard in years. The logbook lay open beside his bed, but it wasn't the source. Something fluttered near the window. He rose, still heavy with the dread that had become his constant companion, and found a photograph wedged beneath the cracked pane. Half of it had been burned away, edges curled inward like petals. But the faces remained clear. 5 children, a veiled woman standing behind them, and himself, smiling, one arm draped protectively around Clara's shoulder. He touched the image, heart pounding. The date scrawled at the bottom was impossible, October 12th, 1889. He staggered back, breath misting in the cold air. No, this isn't real. The reflection in the window said otherwise. In the faint glass, he wasn't alone. Behind his reflection stood the children, pale and silent, their faces soft and unreadable. Clara met his eyes through the glass. "You remember more every day," she said. This photograph." His voice cracked. "It can't be me. It's all of us," she replied, her reflection flickering like candlelight. "Before the fire, when we still believed she could save us." Christian gripped the frame so tightly it splintered. "What happened that night, Clara? What really happened?" Her voice lowered. "You already know. You saw it in the lantern." He turned the photo over. On the back, faint words had been written in an elegant hand. "The keeper lights the way home." He felt the air shift behind him, the subtle weight of a presence forming. "Elias?" he whispered, but the voice that answered was not Elias's. It was older, gentler, threaded with sorrow. "You should have left when the snow first fell." The sound came from the walls themselves, from the grain of the wood. Smoke curled out of the seams, like breath escaping an old wound. Christian backed toward the door, but it wouldn't budge. Frost had sealed the hinges. The photograph began to curl in his hand, its edges glowing orange. "Stop," he gasped. "Please." "You made a promise," the voice said, "to keep the fire from dying." He threw the picture onto the table, but it didn't burn away. Instead, the fire spread outward, tracing faint shapes across the wood, symbols identical to those on the lantern. Spirals, eyes, crosses turned sideways. Clara's reflection flickered once more in the window pane. "You have to finish what you started," she said. "I don't understand." "You will," she whispered. When the snow stops, outside the storm had vanished. The world lay bare and silent under a pale sky. No wind, no birds, no sound. Christian stepped outside, the photograph clutched tight. His breath caught as he saw them. 6 mounds in the snow, small even, perfectly aligned beside the tree line. He moved closer. They weren't mounds. They were beds carved of ice, each lined with withered flowers and tiny trinkets, a doll's shoe, a wooden spoon, a hair ribbon. The last one held a charred ranger's badge, his own. He sank to his knees. "No," he whispered. "That's not me. That's not—" A cold wind passed through him, hollowing his chest. He looked down and saw the snow beneath him melting, steam curling upward in red threads. The children's voices rose faintly from below the surface, singing a lullaby he almost remembered. He pressed the photograph to his heart, trembling. "Tell me what to do." Clara's voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Light the way." The burned edges of the photo flared again, but this time the fire didn't consume it. It traveled up his arm instead, warm and painless, as though guiding him. He stood, eyes reflecting the glow. The forest before him shimmered. For an instant, he saw it not as it was, but as it had been. Green summer leaves, sunlight through the branches, laughter from a nearby cabin. The children ran through the clearing, chasing one another. The woman watched from the porch, smiling faintly, veil fluttering in the breeze. Then the vision darkened. Smoke. Screams. The roof collapsing. Christian staggered back, clutching his head. "Stop!" The world snapped back to silence. Only the photograph remained, its center now blank, the faces erased. He turned it over again. The writing on the back had changed. "Keep them warm until I return." He dropped it, heart pounding. "Return? Who's coming?" The air shifted again, heavy, electric. From the forest's edge, a faint orange glow began to rise, not the soft light of dawn, but the harsh flicker of flames. The fire was coming back. He looked once more at the photograph lying in the snow. This time, his reflection within its glossy surface wasn't his own. It was hers. The veiled woman smiled from the other side of the paper. Welcome home. Christian. The first snow of the new year fell in silence, soft, patient flakes drifting down through the smoke that still clung to the trees. Christian knelt in the ruins, brushing aside soot and splinters with gloved hands until his fingers found the edge of something cool and curved. The silver caught a glint of daylight as he lifted it free. A locket, small as a coin, blackened by fire but intact. He thumbed open the clasp. Inside, the girl's portrait stared back at him. Clara, no older than 6, the ribbon in her hair faded to ghostly grey. Beside her a second image, a man's outline. But the face was savaged by long, sharp gouges, as though someone had tried to erase him from existence. Beneath the portraits, faint engraving, "For those who keep the flame alive," he froze. The same phrase had appeared once before, carved into the lantern's base. The wind hissed through the beams, carrying whispers that sounded almost human. He closed the locket and slipped it into his coat. But as soon as it touched his chest, a vision pressed itself into his mind. It was night again, and the forest shimmered with orange light. Fire danced on the walls of the cabin, but the heat came not from destruction, from warmth, from ritual. He saw himself kneeling before the hearth. A woman stood beside him, her veil gone now, hair long and black as pitch. Her eyes were sharp, ageless. In her hand, she held the same locket. "Do you know why we wear this, Christian?" she asked. He shook his head. "To remember," she whispered. "The children cannot leave if the flame dies. You are their keeper now." She placed the locket around his neck. "If ever you forget, it will remind you." He looked down. The silver glowed faintly against his chest. "But remember this too," she added, her tone hardening. "A keeper who doubts his purpose will burn with them." Then the vision snapped. Christian gasped awake, snow clinging to his lashes. The locket was still in his hand, warm now, almost pulsing. He stood, surveying the blackened remains of the ranger's post. The woods beyond were silent, yet the feeling of being watched pressed on him like a physical weight. He turned toward the old trail leading north, the one the map said ended in nothing. But something pulled him that way. A tug deep in the chest that felt older than memory. Each step he took, the locket grew heavier, until it dragged at his neck like guilt. He finally stopped beside a stone marker half swallowed by frost. There, etched crudely into the granite, were 6 initials: CM, LTRS JP, TW, and below them CG his. He staggered back. "No," he whispered. "I wasn't—" The air turned bitterly cold. From the trees emerged figures, faint at first, outlines of the children, faces pale, eyes luminous in the half-light. Clara led them, her ribbon fluttering in the wind. "You kept us warm," she said softly. "What do you mean?" Christian asked. "What did I do?" "You stayed," she replied, "even when she told you to leave." His breath came fast. Who was she?" "The one who made the promise," Clara said. "The one who wanted us to live forever." He shook his head. "That's not life." She tilted hers. "It was to her." The locket flared, searing against his chest. He tore it off, but the clasp wouldn't break. "She said you would come back," Clara whispered. "She said the fire would bring you home." "Clara, please." The wind roared suddenly, scattering ash. When it cleared, the children were gone. Only the trees remained, and beneath them, the faint outline of a stone door carved into the hillside. One that hadn't been there a moment before. The locket's glow pulsed faster. As though urging him forward, he hesitated, then pressed the pendant to the stone. The wall trembled and split open, revealing a narrow passage descending into darkness. The air smelled of candle wax and decay. He stepped inside. The deeper he went, the more he felt the walls breathing, slow, rhythmic, like a creature asleep. The floor was lined with melted candles, and each one flickered to life as he passed, lighting the descent with trembling orange halos. At the bottom waited an altar. Upon it, a second locket, identical to his, resting beside a charred journal. He opened the book and froze at the first line. "To my successor, Christian Gable, may you forgive what I could not undo." The handwriting was his own. A whisper echoed from behind him, low and feminine. "Now you understand." He turned and saw her. The veiled woman, unchanged by time, stood among the flickering lights. Her eyes burned with sorrow. "You kept them alive," she said softly. "But only through me." Christian backed away. "What are you?" Her lips curved into a sad smile. "What you made me." The candles flared one by one until the chamber glowed like the heart of a furnace. Christian clutched the locket, feeling its heat burrow into his skin. "I won't let this continue," he said, her voice turned sharp, echoing through the stone. "You can't stop what's already buried in your name." The locket's chain snapped, not from force, but from surrender. It fell to the floor with a dull metallic cry, splitting open. The two portraits inside, the girl and the scratched-out man, shifted. The man's face reformed. It was his own. The air quivered with firelight and the faint sound of children's laughter. Neither alive nor dead, suspended between both, he fell to his knees, tears burning his cheeks. The woman stepped closer, her shadow stretching over him. "Every keeper says that," she whispered. "Every one." The chamber went dark. When Christian woke, the candles were gone. Only darkness remained, thick, motionless, and almost wet. He could feel the stone beneath his palms, cold and veined with moisture, and the faint metallic taste of ash in the air. His locket lay shattered beside him. Next to it, half buried in melted wax, was a small wooden box. It was no larger than his palm, its lid engraved with vines that spiraled inward to a single eye. He hesitated before lifting it, and when he did, something inside shifted, not like metal, but like breath. He opened the lid. The melody began, soft at first, almost tender. 3 slow notes, then 5. Then a pause, long enough to make the silence ache. And then came the humming, not from the box, but from behind him. He turned, but there was nothing. Only the walls, slick with condensation, whispering as the tune filled the chamber. Yet the sound pulled at something deep in him. A memory half buried beneath years he couldn't name. A lullaby, his mother's voice, or what he thought was hers, drifting through a fever dream from childhood. The words, though, were wrong. "Sleep, little keeper. Fire won't fade. Those you have buried will learn to stay." The music box slowed, then stopped. Christian's hands trembled. He turned the crank again, but it resisted, stiff from age. When it finally moved, the melody reversed. The same notes played backward, and then the air in front of him shimmered. Shapes began to form in the dust, silhouettes of children standing in a circle. Their heads tilted toward the box, listening. He whispered, "Clara." She didn't answer. Instead, the tallest of them, a boy with a burned collar and hollow eyes, stepped forward. "It's her song," he said softly. "She played it before she left." "Who?" Christian asked. "The woman you called keeper before you." He swallowed hard. "She was your mother," the boy finished. "And your teacher." The words struck like a falling beam. "No," he whispered. "I never—" But the faces around him flickered like candlelight, and the truth pressed through the fog of his denial. He remembered now, a cabin burning, not once, but again and again, in visions that haunted him since boyhood. His mother's hands guiding his over the flame, her voice steady as she whispered about binding the lost and feeding the light. He had thought it a nightmare, but this place, this cycle, was her creation. The box clicked again. A compartment inside slid open to reveal something small, wrapped in black cloth. He unfolded it slowly and found a single brass key, old and tarnished. The head of the key bore the same engraved eye as the music box lid. When he touched it, the children stepped back. The walls began to groan, as though something behind them were waking. Clara appeared once more, her ribbon charred at the ends, her voice a whisper, "Don't open it yet." "Why?" he asked. "Because once you do," she said, "the keeper before you returns." Christian looked down at the key, at its cold gleam. "She's dead." Clara's gaze didn't waver. "Nothing here dies, Christian. It only waits." The floor trembled beneath his boots. Dust fell from the ceiling like snow. He looked toward the far wall, where a faint outline of a door pulsed in rhythm with the melody. The key burned in his hand. "She wants you to turn it," Clara whispered. "Then tell me what's behind it." Her answer was barely a breath. Us. The lights dimmed. The children vanished. The box's tune wound down into silence, the kind that hums after lightning. Christian stood before the stone door, heart hammering. His reflection rippled across its surface, warped and ghostly. He thought of the journal, the locket, the countless lies stitched through his memory. If the truth waited beyond, he had to face it. He pressed the key into the lock. It turned easily, too easily. The door opened, not outward but inward, inhaling him like a breath. Behind it was a room that shouldn't exist, vast, circular and lit by fire that gave no heat. Dozens of music boxes floated in the air, each playing a different fragment of the same melody. At the center stood a chair carved from bone and ash, and seated there, perfectly still, was his mother. Her eyes were closed, hands folded over her lap. Around her neck hung a locket identical to his, unbroken, gleaming faintly in the firelight. "Mother," he whispered. Her eyes opened. They burned silver. "Welcome home, Keeper." He stepped back, shaking. "You're not real." "I am what you made me," she said. "You were never meant to leave this place. You were meant to remember." The music swelled, twisting into 100 overlapping voices, children whispering, pleading, laughing. She stood, her shadow stretching toward him like spilled ink. "You took their names," she said softly. "Now you will carry their silence." The key melted in his hand. The fire flared. Christian screamed, not in pain but recognition. Every moment he'd forgotten, every life lost in the flames, every cry he'd turned from, all of it surged through him, and then, as suddenly as it began, the chamber went still. The chair was empty. The fire gone. Only the music box remained, its lid open, playing a final note that stretched into eternity. He was alone again, except for the faint whisper that drifted through the air. Almost kind, almost maternal. "Sleep, little keeper. The fire will fade." Christian emerged from the underground chamber into grey morning light. Snow fell in lazy spirals, settling on the ruins of the ranger station. His hands shook, still faintly warm from the fire that hadn't burned. The forest around him was quiet, not peaceful, but listening. He knelt beside the well, its stones rimmed with frost, and found the Bible there, half buried, pages fused together by soot. He brushed the snow off carefully, as if afraid to wake it. When he opened it, ash fell like black petals. The first legible words read, "And those who keep the flame shall never know rest." Christian closed it immediately. From the tree line came the sound of children's feet, not running, not playing, but pacing in rhythm. He turned slowly. The 5 orphans stood between the pines, their clothes now clean, their skin unmarked by soot. They looked almost alive again. Almost. Clara stepped forward. "She's gone, isn't she?" He nodded once. "For now." "But you know she'll come back," the boy murmured. "I don't know what she is anymore," Christian replied. The wind stirred, carrying the faint scent of burning pine. He felt it, that subtle shift in the air, as if the valley itself inhaled. The children gathered closer. Clara's small hand brushed against the Bible. "That was hers too," she said softly. "She read it to us before the night came. Said fire was God's first language." Christian frowned. "And you believed her?" Clara looked down. "We wanted to." He stood, the Bible tucked under his arm. "You don't need to follow her words anymore. The world's bigger than this valley." But the children didn't move, their eyes fixed on something behind him. He turned. The well was smoking. A thin column of grey rose from its mouth, twisting into the air like a signal. The smell that followed was unmistakable. Old, wet fire, the kind that burns without oxygen. Christian stepped closer and peered into the dark. The smoke formed shapes, Faces, countless faces, pale and flickering. The Bible grew heavier in his grip. When he looked down again, the text had changed. The keeper's oath, "Feed the silence, bind the fire." He dropped it. The ground trembled. The children gasped. From within the well came a low groan, then the soft rattle of chains. The air shimmered with heat, though the snow still fell. "She's coming," Clara whispered. "No," Christian said through clenched teeth. "Not again." He grabbed the Bible and tore out a page, crushing it into a ball. "You said she read to you." "Tell me what she wanted." Clara's lip trembled. "To finish what was started, to keep the valley clean. What does that mean?" She didn't answer. Instead, she looked toward the far ridge, where a dark shape was moving slowly down through the mist, a figure walking on the snow without leaving prints. The pages of the Bible began to turn on their own. The words rearranged, black ink flowing across paper like liquid. Christian forced the book shut, bound it with a strip of torn cloth, and threw it into the well. The smoke vanished instantly. The tremor stopped. The forest went still. The children looked to him, waiting. "Go," he said. "As far as your legs can carry you." They hesitated. Clara stepped forward. "What about you?" "I'll stay," he said quietly. "Someone has to keep the door closed." Her eyes filled with something that almost looked like pity. "That's what she said." He swallowed hard. "And she was wrong." The boy turned toward the path leading north. The others followed, fading into the mist like memory. When Christian was sure they were gone, he leaned over the well again. His reflection stared back at him, tired, aged, and faintly luminous in the dawn light. He spoke softly to the silence. "You taught me to guard the fire. But you never said from whom." From below a whisper rose, his mother's voice, faint and distant, "From yourself." Then the wind picked up. Snow filled the air, erasing the last of the tracks. Christian sank to his knees beside the well, exhaustion creeping through his bones. The valley no longer burned, yet the air still smelled of smoke. He looked toward the forest where the children had vanished and whispered, "Run far. Don't look back." For a long moment, he listened to the soft hiss of snow, the crackle of ice forming on stone, and the slow rhythm of his own breath. Then, faintly, from somewhere deep below the earth, came the sound of the music box playing its last note. He didn't move. He only closed his eyes and waited for the note to end, or the silence to begin. The following morning came with silence, the kind that felt like the forest holding its breath. The storm had broken during the night, leaving behind a thin glaze of frost over everything. The trees gleamed silver in the weak light, and Christian stood among them, the compass cupped in his hand. The needle turned slowly, not toward the horizon, but toward the sound of a heartbeat. His own. Each time it aligned, it quivered, as if unsure whether to flee or follow. He'd found it wedged in the lightning-split pine while searching for dry wood. At first glance it seemed broken, its glass face spidered with cracks. But when he touched it, the air around him shifted. The forest seemed to listen again. And he knew this thing had purpose. He started walking. The compass needle wavered, humming faintly, and the sound drew him deeper into the timberline, where the snow thinned to patches of dead grass. With each step, the light dimmed. He thought of the children, of Clara's words. "She said you'd come to finish what she started." The phrase circled in his mind like a hawk above carrion. What had his mother started? And what if he already had? Ahead, through the fog, he spotted the outline of a small wooden post, an old boundary marker. He brushed away the frost and read the engraving. Ranger Ward Boundary, 1889. His name, the same name as his own. He stared at it, heart pounding. No, but the more he looked, the clearer it became. The carving wasn't new. The letters had been weathered by decades, softened by time. He'd walked into the past. Or perhaps the past had walked into him. The compass began to vibrate. The glass pulsed faintly blue, like a heartbeat beneath ice. Christian followed it to a clearing he didn't recognize, a circle of scorched earth at its center, surrounded by the stumps of long-dead trees. It smelled faintly of smoke and something older, like burned incense and salt. He knelt, brushing his hand across the soil. It was warm. Underneath, something metallic gleamed. He dug with his hands until the edge of a box appeared, small, iron, its hinges sealed with wax. The compass needle stopped moving, frozen in place, as if it had arrived at confession. Christian pried it open. Inside lay a stack of papers, each brittle with age. The top page was a ranger's report, signed in faded ink. Elias Ward, chief keeper of the Western Ridge. He froze. Elias, his ancestor. Or perhaps something closer. The report detailed the investigation of a cabin fire, one that matched everything he'd seen. 5 orphans, missing bodies, the smell of ash and decay. But the final paragraph was what stopped his breath. Containment incomplete. The fire was not physical but spectral. The children are bound to the keeper's bloodline until the vow is fulfilled. Only by returning the vessel to its origin can the valley rest. He turned the page and found a drawing. The music box. Below it, a note written in frantic script, "Never play the melody in reverse." Christian sat back, winded. The last time he'd opened it, the tune had reversed on its own. He had already broken the seal. A low hum spread through the clearing. The compass began spinning wildly, the needle vibrating against the cracked glass. The air thickened, and from the trees came the sound of voices, children again, laughing this time. But not kindly. The laughter echoed around him until it became impossible to tell direction from distance. He grabbed the compass, whispering, "Show me out." It flickered once, then pointed toward the western slope. He ran, boots crunching through frost and ash, his breath burning the cold air. The laughter followed. Everywhere he turned, he saw glimpses, pale faces, small hands reaching from the smoke, Clara's ribbon flashing between the trees. "Stop!" he shouted. "I'm trying to end it." The voices stopped instantly. Only one answered, Clara's. "Then finish what she couldn't." He looked down at the compass. The glass glowed again, brighter now, and beneath the cracks he saw something moving. Not reflection, not light, but the faint outline of eyes staring back at him. He nearly dropped it, but then he realized the compass wasn't guiding him out. It was guiding him in. He followed its pull until he reached a cliff overlooking the frozen river. Below, the ruins of another cabin, older, smaller, sunken into the ground as though swallowed by time. The needle quivered, then stopped. He descended carefully, the slope slick with ice, and stood before the cabin's blackened door. On it, carved deep, were 5 symbols, small handprints pressed into the char. He placed his palm over the largest. The wood was warm. From inside, the faint sound of the music box began to play again. He closed his eyes. The melody drifted up through the cracks in the boards, slower this time, tired. He understood now. The valley didn't want revenge. It wanted release. He whispered into the dark, "Then let it end with me." The compass cracked completely, shattering in his hand. Its glass fell to the snow in a ring of blue shards. The cabin door opened on its own. Inside, the air smelled of fire and salt. 5 small beds lined the wall, perfectly made, untouched by time. He stepped through, not sure if it was into the past or into what waited beyond it. The door closed behind him with a sigh. The air inside the sunken cabin was still. The smell of old smoke hung thick, and every surface bore the residue of lives half-lived and suddenly ended. Christian stood in the doorway, breath shallow, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. 5 beds, 5 toys, the faint smell of lilac soap, impossibly fresh. He felt the years pressing down, not the years since the fire, but the ones before it. The ones he had somehow carried in his blood without knowing. Something flickered above him, an iron lantern swung from a beam, unlit yet glowing faintly from within, as if its own memory burned there. Christian reached up and steadied it. The metal was warm, vibrating gently beneath his fingertips. When he turned the knob at its base, the glass shimmered, then came alive with dull amber light. The cabin changed. Walls breathed. Shadows lengthened, and in that trembling light, The past began to move, the air filled with soft voices, a woman humming, a child's giggle, the sound of logs cracking in a fireplace that no longer existed. He watched as the room filled with spectral outlines, not ghosts, but memories replaying themselves. A woman stood by the hearth, brushing the hair of a little girl. A man, his face indistinct, entered with a bucket of water and set it down beside the door. The woman turned and Christian's chest tightened. It was her. His mother, years before the fire, her eyes filled not with malice, but with exhaustion. She looked toward the beds where the 5 children slept peacefully. Then her lips moved, and the lantern dimmed slightly as her words took form in the air, whisper thin. Fire cleanses. Fire binds. What burns here stays here, Christian whispered hoarsely. Why? The scene froze. The figures flickered. Then her head turned. Not toward the man, but toward him, as if she heard him. Because, she said softly, it was the only way to keep them from being taken. The lantern flared, and the illusion broke apart. The cabin was empty again. Christian clutched the lantern, heart hammering. Taken by who? He asked the silence. The light shifted, glowing brighter in the direction of the far wall. A faint outline appeared there, like a door or trap hatch sealed beneath planks. He crouched and brushed away soot until his hand struck cold metal, a ring handle. He pulled. The wood lifted easily, revealing stairs that descended into blackness. The lantern's light pulsed faster, as though eager. He descended slowly, one hand on the rough wall, the other holding the lantern high. The air grew colder, heavier. Beneath the scent of ash lay something older, salt and iron, the smell of blood and brine. At the bottom, the passage widened into a narrow chamber. In its center sat a large stone basin, filled with water so still it reflected perfectly. Beside it rested a charred book, and on the far wall words were etched deep into the stone. To protect the living, bind the lost. One keeper for each fire. The lantern dimmed. Christian approached the basin and knelt. His reflection stared back, pale and trembling. Behind him, faint outlines began to appear. The children, watching silently from the shadows. Clara stepped forward. She thought she was saving us, she whispered. But she trapped us instead. Christian's grip tightened on the lantern handle. Then we free you, Clara shook her head. To free us, the fire must be carried again. He looked to the basin. What happens if I refuse? Then we stay, she said. And so will you. The lantern flickered violently. The water's surface rippled. From within the reflection a shape rose, his mother again, her form pale as smoke, eyes hollowed by grief. You were meant to guard what I couldn't destroy, she said. Now it's yours to end. He wanted to speak but couldn't. The lantern burst into sudden, searing brightness. The room flooded with amber light, washing over every wall until the shadows screamed, not voices but memories unraveling. The children shielded their faces. The air filled with the crackle of phantom fire, and Christian realized what the lantern showed him wasn't destruction, it was choice. He saw 2 paths, one where the fire spread through the valley, consuming every echo of the past, but freeing the souls within it. Another where he kept it contained, preserving the memories forever, and himself along with them. Clara's voice broke through the roar. You can't save us both. Christian closed his eyes. He lifted the lantern high and whispered, then let the light choose. The flame inside split in 2, one gold, one blue. The blue light drifted toward the children, wrapping them in calm warmth. The gold rose like a sunburst, igniting the air with soft heat. When Christian opened his eyes again, the chamber was empty. The basin was dry. Only the lantern remained, its glow fading to nothing. He climbed back up into the cabin. The snow outside had stopped falling. The valley was quiet, not listening anymore, but resting. He set the lantern on the floor, now cold and ordinary, and stepped out into the open air. The forest exhaled. The wind returned, and for the first time in memory there was no smell of smoke. By dawn the storm had passed, leaving behind a stillness so complete it felt sacred. Christian trudged through the snow, every step sinking deep into the frozen hush. Behind him, the cabin lay in ruins, its ash cooled to grey. He didn't look back. In his pocket, the lantern's handle was broken, but beside it, something new glimmered faintly. He drew it out, a glass compass small enough to fit in his palm. It had not been there before. The surface shimmered with frost, and the needle within swayed lazily, not toward north, but toward the mountains that framed the horizon. He turned it gently. The needle resisted, always dragging itself back to that same direction, as if it knew the way to something unfinished. The valley stretched before him, vast and white, the trees heavy with ice. He followed the compass without thinking, driven by instinct more than reason. The land seemed familiar now, not because he had walked it before, but because something in his blood remembered it. Hours passed. The light dimmed to grey. He came to a frozen river, the same one the orphans had once followed, their laughter echoing in his dreams. The compass needle spun wildly when he approached the center, then stopped dead. Something was beneath the ice. Christian crouched, brushing away snow until he could see through the glassy surface. A faint shadow moved below, circular, metallic. A bell, he recognized it instantly. The church bell that had been lost during the fire decades ago, swallowed by the earth when the ground cracked open. The compass needle began to pulse with light, faint but insistent, as if urging him closer. He pulled the hatchet from his belt and began to chip away at the ice. The sound echoed across the valley, each strike sharp and hollow. When the surface finally gave, a gush of black water surged upward. He reached in, hands numb, and gripped the bell's rim. It came free with surprising ease. The moment it broke the surface, a low hum filled the air. The compass in his other hand glowed brighter, a beam of white light shooting from its core, striking the bell like a tuning fork. The sound that followed wasn't metallic, but human, layered voices singing through the wind. Christian stumbled back, shielding his ears. The bell rang again, not a sound of warning, but of remembrance. Images cascaded through his mind. The cabin, the fire, the mother's face, the valley long before it was haunted. The light spread across the snow, revealing shapes, old foundations, forgotten graves, the outlines of paths buried by time, and among them, the figures of those who had waited. The children stood on the opposite bank, whole and warm, no longer spectral. Clara smiled faintly, holding the hand of the smallest boy. "You found the compass," she said, her voice carried perfectly across the frozen air. Christian nodded slowly. "What is it showing me?" "It points to what the heart still seeks," she said. "Yours wasn't peace. It was truth." He looked down at the compass. The needle trembled now, hovering between them, not pointing to the mountains anymore, but to Clara herself. "I didn't mean for you to be trapped here," he said. "I didn't even know I carried her curse." "You didn't," Clara said gently. "You carried her love, twisted, buried, but love all the same." The bell rang again. The snow beneath their feet began to glow, tracing lines between the old foundations like veins of light. Clara took a step back. "The valley remembers now. It won't need us anymore." The children's forms began to fade, soft as smoke. Christian reached out. "Wait," she smiled. "You can't follow where we're going, Christian." "But you can keep walking. The compass will lead you until it stops." The air shimmered once, then was still. Only the bell and compass remained. The compass needle turned slowly once, then stilled, pointing now toward the rising sun. Christian looked east. For the first time in years, the horizon looked alive, not with fire, but light. He set the bell gently in the snow beside the river, its echo lingering faintly in the air. Then he pocketed the compass, adjusted his coat, and began to walk toward the light. Behind him, the bell tolled once more, soft and final. The sound rolled across the valley, through the forest, up the ridges, a farewell note from a place finally freed of its ghosts. Christian didn't look back. Each step felt lighter than the last. The snow melted beneath his boots, revealing the faint trace of grass, and for the first time since the fire, the valley breathed again. When Christian returned to the ranger's outpost days later, The valley had quieted in an unnatural way. No wind brushed through the trees, no crows stirred the branches, just the weight of air, thick and waiting. He went to the small storage shed where he kept his tools. The door hung ajar, swinging in a slow rhythm against the wall. He drew his rifle, eased the door open, and stopped. Someone had been there. The floor was swept clean except for a trail of ash, not scattered but deliberate, forming a single straight line that led to the old workbench. And on that bench sat a half-burned Bible, its cover still warm to the touch. He turned it over carefully. The leather flaked under his fingers, brittle and blackened. When he opened the book, the first few pages crumbled into dust, but the rest held. The ink shimmered faintly, bleeding into the parchment as if alive. He scanned the pages. Some verses were whole, others half consumed. But 3 words glared back: untouched by flame, ashes, deliverance, home. He whispered them aloud, and the wind outside stirred, breaking the silence that had gripped the forest for days. A memory rose unbidden. His mother's voice reading by lantern light, a verse about judgment by fire, a promise that all things burned would one day be made pure again. But this Bible wasn't hers. He turned to the back page and froze. There, written in a trembling hand, was a name: Clara Ward. He dropped the book. The realization hit him like ice. The same Clara he'd seen in the woods, the same child from the fire. Ward wasn't his name by blood. He had taken it when he joined the service after the orphanage burned. But if Clara's name was in this Bible, and she was one of them, then who was he? He knelt, picking up the book again, feeling the warmth pulse faintly beneath the char. As he turned another page, a folded scrap of paper fell free. It was a map, drawn in soot and candle wax, marked with a single cross deep in the valley, beyond the river, past the ridge where the compass had first glowed. Something waited there, something connected to his past and theirs. He packed the Bible and the compass into his satchel and left the outpost behind. The snow was beginning to fall again, but softer now, as though the sky was tired of punishing the earth. He followed the map by lantern light, the forest pressing close. Every few steps he felt a faint pulse through his coat, the Bible, alive with heat. By midnight he reached the ridge. The moonlight caught on something ahead, wood and iron, half buried under years of decay. An old chapel, the roof had caved in long ago, and vines coiled through the rafters like veins. The bell was missing, the same one he'd pulled from the river. Inside, the air was warm, too warm. He stepped through the broken doorway and laid the Bible on the altar. The pages rustled, turning on their own, stopping near the center. A verse bled through the soot: from the ashes they shall rise, and through deliverance find home. He whispered the words. The ground trembled. Behind the altar the wall split open, revealing a staircase of blackened stone. The lantern flickered, but he kept moving, descending into the dark. At the bottom he found a chamber, circular, filled with the scent of earth and smoke. In the center lay 5 small coffins, perfectly preserved. Each bore a name carved into the lid. 4 girls, 1 boy. He moved closer, heart pounding. The 5th coffin bore the name Christian Ward. He staggered back. The compass in his pocket flared white-hot, and the Bible burst into light on the altar above, flooding the chamber below with fireless radiance. The children's laughter filled the space, soft and echoing, and Clara's voice followed, not from memory, but from right beside him. You never left, Christian. You've been here since the night of the fire. He turned, but no one was there, only the whisper of smoke curling from the seams of the coffin. The words in the Bible seared themselves into his mind: ashes, deliverance, home. Tears burned his eyes as he reached out, tracing his own name across the coffin's lid. The wood was warm, almost breathing. Then let it end, he said. Let it all go home. The light expanded, swallowing the room in brilliance. The fire returned, not to destroy, but to free. When it faded, the coffins were gone. The chamber was empty, and for the first time since the fire, so was the valley's grief. Above ground, the chapel bell rang once, a sound no one living heard. The storm that night was unlike any Christian had known. It rolled through the valley without wind, only light, white, pulsing, endless light that seemed to come from beneath the ground rather than above. He woke in the ruins of the chapel, smoke curling from his coat, the Bible turned to dust beside him. He rose slowly. His body felt different, heavier but not with pain. The silence outside was complete. No wind, no fire, no voices, just the distant hum of something unseen deep in the bones of the earth. He stepped out into the dawn. The valley below shimmered beneath a veil of frost, yet the snow melted where his boots fell. In his pocket something rattled, small, metallic. He drew it out, a locket. He didn't remember taking it, but it felt familiar, as though it had always been his. He brushed away the grime, revealing faint initials, C.W. His breath caught. The same letters as his own name, Christian Ward. The clasp creaked as he opened it. Inside, on one side, was a lock of pale hair. On the other, a photograph burned around the edges. A woman standing before a cabin engulfed in flame. Her face was turned, caught between fear and resolve, and behind her, 5 children. Christian closed the locket and stood there for a long time, the cold sinking into his bones. He understood now what Clara meant. Mama told us to hide before the fire started. That woman wasn't just their mother. She was his, too. He followed the ridge down toward the river, the locket clutched tight in his palm. Every few steps he heard echoes, faint, childlike laughter carried by memory rather than air. The woods no longer frightened him. The valley no longer hid from him. Everything felt suspended, waiting for him to see what had always been true. At the riverbank, he found the remains of an old marker stone, split in 2. Beneath it, black soil, damp and rich. He knelt and dug with his hands until his fingers struck metal. A small tin box, rusted nearly through. Inside were scraps of parchment and a fragment of glass, etched with his mother's handwriting. For whoever remains, we did what we could. The children were not meant to burn. They were meant to return. He closed the box and looked toward the mountains. The clouds were parting there, sunlight bleeding through like a wound, healing in slow motion. A whisper drifted on the thawing air. "It's time, Christian." He turned and saw them standing across the river, 5 silhouettes of light. The orphans, whole now, eyes soft and knowing. Clara stepped forward. "We waited," she said. He nodded. "I know." She pointed toward the tree line where his cabin once stood. "Home." He followed her gaze. The place was nothing but foundation and scorched stone. Yet he could almost see it as it was, the smoke curling from the chimney, his coat on the rack, the steady rhythm of life before the fire. The locket grew warm in his hand. He opened it again, staring at the photograph. The image shimmered, and for the briefest moment the woman's face turned toward him. She smiled. Then the light faded, and he was alone. Christian sank to his knees beside the river. He placed the locket in the mud, covering it gently, and whispered, "You can rest now." The earth exhaled, a gust that rippled the water's surface and lifted the frost from the grass. The children's laughter echoed once more, softer this time, like a farewell carried on the wind. When he looked up, the valley was empty. But the air no longer felt heavy. The curse, or whatever it was, had lifted. He stood there for a long time before heading back toward the ridge. His breath fogged before him, thin and ghost-like. The sun rose behind the mountains, spilling gold across the world that had burned for too long. At the top of the hill, he turned back one last time. From afar, the melted snow glistened in strange shapes. 5 small footprints leading to the river, then none beyond it. He smiled faintly. "A home," he whispered. And as he walked away, the locket beneath the soil gave one final glint in the morning light before sinking into the thawing earth. Weeks passed after the storm lifted. The forest thawed, and the rivers found their voices again. Wildlife returned to the valley, cautious at first, then confident, as though the land itself had been forgiven. At the ranger's station, a new man took over the post, a young recruit from Montana named Ellis Price. He found the building quiet, nearly empty, save for a few broken lanterns and one object resting on the desk, a leather-bound ledger, edges charred, still faintly smelling of smoke. On its cover were the initials CW. He opened it, expecting duty logs or patrol notes. Instead, he found a confession, April 12th, 1925. The valley is quiet now. I believe it always wanted to be. The fire has gone home. If anyone finds this, know that I stayed because I had to. Not out of guilt, but because I was part of it all. The children were not lost souls. They were echoes trying to be remembered. I think they came back for that reason alone. There are names that stay in the air long after the bodies are gone. Clara, Samuel, Ruth, Anna, Elsie, and one more, mine. I understand now that the living and the dead keep each other company. It's the forgetting that hurts, not the haunting. Ellis paused, his thumb tracing over the ink. He turned the page and found more, each line careful, deliberate. I found my mother's locket by the river this morning. The frost had nearly swallowed it. Inside, her picture still waits. The same face that haunted the photograph in the Bible. I think she knew what would happen that night. Maybe she even lit the fire herself to save us from something worse. Maybe she was right. I buried the locket beneath the oak tree, where the river bends east. If anyone ever hears laughter in that place, don't be afraid. That's how you'll know they're still near. The handwriting wavered slightly near the end, as though written in dim light. When I close this book, I'll walk back to the ridge. There's an old bell there, half buried in snow. I think I'll set it back where it belongs. The sound of it might carry far enough to let them know I'm ready. Some people think the frontier ends where the maps stop. I don't. I think it ends where the heart finally rests. Ellis exhaled slowly and looked around the room. The fireplace was cold, but the faint scent of pine smoke still lingered. He glanced toward the window. Outside, the valley shimmered with morning mist, sunlight bending through the trees. Something moved by the oak near the river, small, quick shapes darting between shadows. He leaned closer, squinting. Children, 5 of them. They ran toward the bend, laughter spilling faintly through the trees. Then as the mist thinned, they were gone. He turned back to the ledger. The last entry, dated 2 days after the one before, was written in different ink, lighter, uneven. April 14th, 1925. The valley is beautiful this morning. The air smells like rain and sap. I've hung the bell again, and the sound carries farther than I expected. I can almost hear them answering. If you read this, know that I am not gone. I've simply gone home, where the fire began and where it finally ended. C.W. Ellis closed the ledger and sat back in the chair. The wind rose outside, brushing against the window pane. Then faint and distant, the bell tolled once, low and solemn, echoing through the valley. He looked toward the ridge. The mist parted just enough for a momentary glimpse, a figure in a ranger's coat standing beside the oak, facing the rising sun. Then the light swallowed the form, and the valley fell silent again. Ellis stayed there for a while, the ledger resting in his lap. When he finally stood, he took it with him, placing it in the drawer of the desk, careful not to disturb the ashes that had gathered there. Before leaving, he wrote one line in the fresh section of the book for Christian Ward, the man who saved the valley, even when it no longer remembered his name. He closed the drawer. Outside, the bell rang once more, not from wind or rope, but from memory, and far down the river, where the oak tree stood and the frost had begun to melt. A single glint of silver appeared in the soil, the edge of a locket, reflecting morning light one final time before sinking beneath the earth.